Things are really changing when it comes to purchasing video games with the Switch 2. There's been a lot of debates out there over purchasing physical or digital this generation with the changes in pricing alongside how games are being distributed. As someone who's only really bought physical copies of games and was prioritizing that for every other system out there, I have some strong opinions for and against buying physical over digital games with the Switch 2. But first off, I want to be a little straight up with this video. This isn't going to be another piece of doomer content bashing the Switch 2. I want to be very honest and just lay down the facts, but at the same time maybe throw in some of my opinions on this topic since I'm quite passionate about it. It's quite easy to just point the finger at Nintendo and say that certain decisions they're making when it comes to physical distribution is bad. But I'd rather just look beyond the what and focus more on the why behind why these decisions are being made in the first place. With this video, we'll be taking a more objective approach to this topic alongside sharing my own decisions that I'm making when it comes to buying Switch 2 games as a result of this. And with that brief disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right into this topic. Starting things off, I feel like it's very important to realise that there are many different audiences when it comes to buying games. Some people prefer the modern conveniences of digital, being able to always have your game library with you and being able to switch out titles on the fly. Whilst others like owning the entire game on a cartridge that they can use on multiple systems and maybe potentially sell down the line to get some money to put back into funding this hobby. There are also game collectors out there that want to own the entire experience on the cartridge with no updates or internet connections required, so that one day when the online has been discontinued they can preserve that experience for as long as they can. They also just look really good on a shelf. Now that we've looked at these different types of audiences, let's take a look at the Switch 2 and how they're going about game distribution. In order to better understand this point, let's first talk a bit about optical media and how this affects the Switch 2 for both physical and digital collectors. On the physical side of things, game keycards really need no introduction at this point. With a game keycard, it's practically a certificate that you put into the Switch 2 and it allows you to download the entire game off of the storefront. It's kinda like a hybrid between physical and digital, but it only takes the worst aspects of both forms. For instance, it takes a lot of internal storage like digital, but at the same time you also need to pop in the cartridge every time you want to use it like physical. The only positive aspect to their existence is that it seems like they're a little more cheaper compared to buying full-on physical, alongside the fact that you can still sell them later on. As someone who loves to buy physical, these new game key cartridges seem to be taking over. Most third-party publishers on the Switch 2 seem to be using game keys over the original standard cartridges. In all honesty, I'm not a big fan of them, but when looking at things a little closer, I started to understand their existence a bit more. According to a leak from Arc Systems, it seems like 64GB cartridges are the only options that publishers have to distribute their games physically. The biggest kicker here is that apparently these new 64GB cartridges that take advantage of the micro express technology cost $16 to produce. Bear in mind, this is the only option that publishers have when wanting to distribute their games physically. So let's say that a third party made a game that's 8GB in file size, they still have to buy a 64GB cartridge simply because there's no other option out there. With the original Switch, since it used regular SD card technology, this wasn't a problem at all. Publishers could buy a 1GB cartridge all the way up to 32GB, with the increase in memory affecting the price of publishing. The amount of options that publishers had is the reason why we saw a lot of indie games get physical releases on the Switch. It's still important to remember, however, that this still had an effect on consumers back in the day, with the term Switch tax being coined. Basically, when third-party games were released on multiple platforms, they typically cost £5 or $5 more when buying the Switch version. This is simply because cartridges cost more to print than Blu-ray discs. Unfortunately, the consumers have always been punished when the extra cost has come into mind. When comparing the two formats between Blu-ray discs and microSD express cartridges, things really start to take perspective. A Blu-ray disc per game can cost publishers anywhere between $1 to $4 to produce, whereas a 64GB Switch 2 cartridge costs publishers $16. This is definitely the reason why Switch 2 games cost so much more when compared to Switch 1 games, with people reacting online to the $80 price of Mario Kart World. This also provides evidence why Nintendo is making their digital games more cheaper compared to their physical games this generation, which is a first for them. The extra price of manufacturing these cartridges are being pushed onto the consumer, and as a result of this, Nintendo really wants you to buy digital this generation. This isn't just exclusive to first-party developers, third parties are also following suit, with their prices being more expensive physical compared to digital. A third-party release that I'm highly anticipating being the third installment of the Idasonian files with the No Sleep for Konami Date is £10 cheaper digital compared to physical. In some ways, Nintendo has always had this problem when it comes to the physical distribution of their games, with the N64 versus PlayStation being a good example of this. It's definitely a topic for another day, but in a lot of ways the Switch 2's distribution with the microSD Express cartridges seems to be another example of that problem when it comes to the cost of distributing their games. Long story short, let's put this into perspective for a moment. So yeah, the biggest problem for physical collectors this generation is that game key cartridges exist and no one likes them, but that's the result of 64GB cartridges being the only option out there, and that's also the result of microSD Express cards existing, which is also the result of game prices going up. Sorry for the long tangent, but I really feel like this topic deserves being explained since so many people out there are glossing over this fact. But does this all mean that digital is better than physical this generation due to the cheaper price? Well, let's take a closer look at that and find out whether or not digital is the way to go. I feel like this really depends on what kind of consumer you are, since there's many different kinds of people out there when it comes to buying games. Some people just want the cheapest price, and even then digital isn't necessarily the option when it comes to that fact. As someone who lives in the UK, there are many outlets out there when it comes to buying games. Some online retailers provide amazing loyalty support programs, and as a result of this, sometimes physical can be cheaper than digital, but this isn't on an MSRP level, this is just due to these websites existing in the UK. I can't speak for everyone when it comes to this point since we all live in different places around the world, but I can understand that for some people, maybe doing your research and finding the different options out there might be worth it when it comes to saving money. Also, on the side of physical collecting, I don't want to get all tinfoil hat here, but I really feel like Nintendo has made some kind of deal with these new microSD Express cartridges. If you was a digital collector with the Switch 1, I kind of feel bad since with the Switch 2 you can't simply pop in your old SD cartridge and use it with the new system. As a result of the advanced reading speeds of the microSD Express cartridges, you can't simply use your old SD cards, and as a result of this you have to go out and buy these much more expensive microSD Express cartridges. Let's say hypothetically you're gonna go all digital with the Switch 2, well things aren't exactly easy going. If you brought the Mario Kart World bundle, which was a decent deal by the way, you're already losing 20GB of internal storage. If you're moving your previous digital collection from the Switch 1 onto the Switch 2, you're easily gonna run out of internal memory and have to fork out money to buy these microSD Express cartridges. Not to mention the fact that a lot of these third-party titles have insane file sizes which will easily take up the Switch 2's internal memory alone. I feel like regardless of how you call it this generation when it comes to physical versus digital, microSD Express cartridges are definitely the reason why things are so different this time around. I just hope that the sacrifices being made due to these more demanding Express cartridges are worth it with their better load times and 4K support, since this technology seems to be very new at this point in time. Nintendo is taking quite the risk with the Switch 2 by investing heavily in this new micro Express technology. But that begs the question, physical or digital this generation? Well, let me just say what I'll be doing this time around. Personally, I'm going to try and be as open-minded as I can with this. Even though game key cartridges kind of frustrate me, I kind of feel like they're still worth more than owning the digital version of a game. This is since you can still sell them sometime down the line. Nintendo has released a statement saying that they'll never use game key cartridges for their first party releases at least. So outside of Mario Kart World with its launch price deal, I'll definitely be sticking to first party physical releases. I'm definitely one of those people that pushes for game preservation, I've mentioned it a few times on this channel. So at the end of the day, I'll definitely be pushing more for physical over digital. But regardless, there are a handful of titles out there, both first party and third party, that you can only get physically or digitally. Ring Fit Adventure comes to mind with how there's no digital version of that title, alongside more experimental games like Part-Time UFO that only has a digital release. So regardless of where you stand personally, I definitely think it's worth being open-minded when it comes to buying games physically or digitally, and at the end of the day, usually the cheapest and most convenient option is the best one. Although I do feel like this whole 64GB Express cartridge problem will dictate whether or not physical media exists during the Switch 2 generation. I know that some of this problem also leans onto the third party side of things, with most third parties using game key cartridges, but at the same time I can kind of understand the why behind it all when you consider the cost. I'm just trying to stay optimistic and hoping that sometime down the line during the Switch 2 consoles generation, game key cartridges will fizzle out entirely. I will say though, above all else during this debate, just enjoy games for what they are, regardless of how you actually play them. Sometimes putting too much headspace into this topic can genuinely get in the way of enjoying gaming. Personally, I ran into this problem a lot during the ending of the Switch 1's generation. A lot of third party games that got physical releases over in America only stayed digital over here in Europe. Titles such as Atelier Yumiya alongside a lot of Capcom's fighting collections as well as the recently released The 100-line Last Defense Academy didn't get physical releases over here in Europe. As a result of this, as someone who's only been buying games physically for the last 20 years due to the fact that it was the standard, I've definitely developed a habit of only buying physical over digital. And it's led me to miss out on certain experiences solely because I wanted to hold out and hope for a physical release. But sometimes compromises have to be made, and in all honesty I'd rather experience these games in any way I can than just wait out for a physical version. I understand that the Switch is region locked and you can import these games from America, but at that point the price gets so high that you can't really justify it to yourself, at least for me personally. Deep down I'm still rooting for physical games to stay for the rest of my life, but at that same time I also need to adjust with how things are changing. The original Switch was an incredible system to collect for, and I feel like it's only going to get popular as time goes on. But I don't think that the Switch 2 is going to be as popular when it comes to physical collecting. So yeah, the TLDR for this video is that I'm still going to be focusing on the physical side of things when it comes to the first party Nintendo titles. But when it comes to third party titles, I'm going to give game key cards a shot, but at the same time maybe try and embrace digital more and more. But now I'm curious, what's your take on this topic? Will you be sticking with your roots or will you be changing things up this generation when it comes to physical and digital media? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Also, any feedback on this video will be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.